place without limits or judgment. A place for you and people like you to tell your most effed up stories.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we're going to be speaking about a very mysterious mountain called, and I can't pronounce this properly, so Ryan, you might have to jump in. Untersberg, is that how you...
Untersberg, well, that's how I read it. Unterberg or Untersberg.
All right, so Untersberg, and this mountain has a lot of varied paranormal topics tied to it, such as missing people, time warps, an extensive underground cave system supposedly filled with portals that people have just vanished into different areas geologically, as well as it served as a very prominent spot for Hitler during the World War II, and even the Dalai Lama had stuff to say about this, and many other long folk tales, I guess, is what you would call them. I mean, there's legends around this thing.
So it's a huge mythology that's built up around Untersberg, which I believe the literal translation for it, or one of the translations I found, is Under Mountain, Untersberg, Under Mountain.
You're right. I did read that as well. So we'll jump into that in just a minute or so. First of all, I want to just cover a couple things, as is always the case here on our podcast. First of all, this was intended to be our first live podcast. Unfortunately, we ran into a number of really big technical hurdles. And unfortunately, despite working at them for, trying to overcome them for quite a bit of time, we weren't able to. I think we're going to have to come to a different solution than what we were trying to do through YouTube. So there's a number of different avenues, but we need something to fit Ryan and I's particular setup, whereas we're in different provinces and stuff like that. So that's something that we'll have ironed out very shortly. So again, sorry about that. Other things I wanted to mention was that we have 5 new stories were added to the official site, effedupstories.com, this week. And I really think you should check those out. The stories are getting very interesting. I'm getting a lot of, you're not going to find the stuff anywhere else. Which brings me to my next point. One of the main things we're trying to do with the website now is create kind of a central hub. A lot of you know us for our podcast on YouTube, but we have several different forms of paranormal media that interlinks from the website. Like, there's been podcasts that we've done based on people's stories that they've sent in, which is it's something else entirely. And then there's all kinds of stories that are not in podcasts, pictures, and different things. So we're trying to create a central hub that has our stories, podcasts, and of course, community is one of the things that we're driving at with the live podcast feature, so that we can all kind of interlink and communicate and create a better show, get better content, and stuff like that. So if you want to get in on that, become a member at effedupstories.com. It's free, it's easy to do, and as I roll out new features, we can all kind of integrate into this kind of paranormal community. There's a couple future updates that I'm looking at integrating right now to make your membership more exciting. So one of the things, of course, the main thing we're working on now is getting the live podcast set up so that you can take part in the podcast as we do them. The other things that we're going to be adding is like comments on all of the articles and stuff like that, and probably a forum as well, so that you guys can kind of go to town with different topics, and just again defeat a community like aspect to what we do. Another thing, if I could ask everybody, everybody likes it when we get new stories and new podcasts, and a big part of where that comes from is how many visitors you get and stuff like that, because the more that you're seen, the more that you're likely to have somebody who has something to offer to drop a line. So one of the ways that happens to get popular, I know we have our YouTube thing going, but the other way we need, for stories and stuff like that, is of course through Google and search engines and stuff like that. So a lot of that comes from your page ranking. And the easiest way for you guys to help us with that is that if you have a blog, or you participate on forums, or you have a website or something like that, if you could just place a link to our official website, just a plain old HTML link, effedupstories.com, effedupstories.com, that would help a lot, because the more backlinks you have, and especially the better quality of the backlinks that you have, such on popular sites, the more our site will go up in page rank, and the more people will find it, the more stories we'll get, and the more content we'll be able to give to you. So that's a way for you to help us help you. And of course, if you have any stories or paranormal pictures or video or whatever, you can send that to us as well to get on our website, possibly in a podcast. Just go to effedupstories.com, go to submissions, fill out the form, and hit submit. So with that said, let's jump into the mysterious Untersberg mountain mystery. Ryan, I guess what we talked about before is that we'd start at the legends portion of this. Ryan? Okay,
sorry about that. I had the mic on mute there for a moment. So starting at the beginning with the far back mythology for Untersberg, I guess the first real strong stories I came across was about Emperor Karl the Great, or Charlemagne. And I mean, this is back, in 700 AD. Allegedly, Charlemagne, Emperor Karl the Great, to this day sleeps inside the mountain in a chamber. And as the story goes, his beard has grown twice around this table that sits in front of him. And once it has grown around 3 times, the day of judgment comes, and he awakes from his sleep and comes forward. In some stories, his knights sleep in there with them. Other stories have him attended by dwarfs and little people. So there's and it's interesting because in that area, I found that there is actually a really strong tradition of myths of kings under the mountain. All different mountains, different kings, different stories, but they all have these similar threads to them.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the things that I found. There are 2 main people that they spoke of in the mountain. One is, as you said, the Karl de Groby, Charlemagne, or whatever, and the other one is Emperor Frederick Barbarossa.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, they actually have, most of the times you come across these legends, they have one of their names listed, and they have all of the details for both of the stories kind of intermingled together. But I've actually seen it mentioned in a couple spots where they were actually differed. Like, that you had the Carl Charlemagne. He was, as you said, he was sleeping there, and with his dwarf people and his beard. The whole thing was that his beard would grow around the table 3 times, and once it hit, his people will awaken and stuff like that. The other one with the Frederick it's very hard to pronounce that last name. We'll call him Frederick.
Frederick.
We'll call him Frederick B. How about that? So anyway, his whole thing was that if the what was it, like the ravens, every 100 years he'd wake up, and or a dwarf would wake up or something like that, and he'd go out and he'd check above this particular mountain peak around there to see these ravens. If there was ravens flying, then he would go back, and the emperor would go back to sleep for another 100 years. If they weren't flying over this peak, the emperor and the dwarves would all wake up, and that would be their sign that doomsday had come, and they would go out to this particular area to fight the battle of the end of the world. So it's interesting that you have 2 different tales, but they're still sleeping kings under the mountain. So,
and now it's interesting that you should tell that particular. So that was about Frederick Barbarossa. Meanwhile, I came across another variation of the Charlemagne tale, which says that when 24 ravens fly 3 times around the top of the mountain, the emperor will awaken. But then he must stay inside the mountain until the famous dwarf stone has been found. And then all the dwarves living inside of Untersberg will be turned into humans, and the emperor will awaken again.
Yeah, so it seems to be that, as is the case when I was looking, that there were several different, their details would be missing in one part and is slightly different in another. And they had the names either, it was one king that had all this stuff together or partial. So there's like a lot of variation upon what you'd find. But the one thing that tends to always be the same is that there's a king sleeping in the mountain. And I guess you'd have to wonder, what sliver of truth had there possibly been for that to be a common thread amongst all these different legends.
Yeah, with either one though, the similarities are king is under the mountain, he's asleep, and basically at the end of the world, when the Antichrist appears, they will awaken with their holy host and come forth to save the German people from the Antichrist and his army of darkness.
That's right. So I mean,
on the day of judgment.
That's right. And so I mean, while we're on the topic of strange stories or legends, now this one is again, this one isn't as much of a legend as is. It sounds fantastical though, but it's supposedly true. Now a lot of these were found on tablets that people had found around the mountain. Of course, it was written in German and translated back to English. So and these are very, very old tablets that were found around there. So they're not new tales or anything like that. And of course, the story I want to focus on here is of Lazarus Agner. The story of Lazarus is one of the more interesting ones that I'd come across. In 1929, Lazarus hikes up this mountain with a mayor and a parish priest. They end up coming across this chapel, and this chapel has these strange inscriptions that, nobody knew what it meant. It was a foreign language, to say the least. But anyway, after hiking all this day, night falls. And they end up deciding that they're going to spend the night rather than hike back down. I mean, you can imagine hiking down in the nighttime is probably not a good idea. So, they spend the night, and the next day Lazarus, he's out kind of walking around later in the day, and he finds this strange-looking monk. And, he asks the monk, where he's from and where he's going. And the monk basically says, I want to give you something to eat, and I will tell you what this inscription that, they found on the chapel means. So, the monk leads this Lazarus to this iron door that's like built into the mountain. It's this big iron door. And he takes out this big thing of keys, he opens the door, and as Lazarus steps in, the monk tells him to, don't tell anybody. It's very important that nobody knows about this. And, when Lazarus steps in, the first thing he spots is this giant tower, and it's sporting this really big golden clock. Now, keep this in mind for just a little bit later in the story. The current time was 7 o'clock. So then Lazarus is led into various different buildings. Like, there's like a whole city inside this mountain. There's all these buildings, fountains, trees and rare fruits, and choirs of people singing. But more oddly, I guess, is that he found 12 doors leading to 12 churches via these underground tunnels. And this is what I was speaking about earlier in Untersberg, is that there's this mass, complex of underground tunnels going all over the place. So, Lazarus asks this monk, basically, who are all these people living here? And the monk responds, they are the old souls who had done well in their life and will defend mankind in the end time. So I guess this kind of links back to the to that story with the emperor, right, with the end times and stuff like that. So Lazarus also had noted that some of the people he saw, he knew to be deceased, including some kings and stuff like that had died long ago. So this continues on for 7 days. Like, Lazarus knows that 7 days had passed, and the monk gives Lazarus a choice. He could stay there in the mountain with all these people, or he can go back home. And I guess, like a lot of people, Lazarus missed his home, and he ends up leaving, right? But on his way out, he once again spots this tower and golden clock, and the time is still 7 o'clock. And when he asks the monk about it, he tells him no time had passed. He also told him that if he wished to live, he wouldn't tell anyone what happened to him for 35 years. And that is actually how this story got out. Lazarus actually wrote about this story exactly 35 years later, to the day, and he died a few days later. So, I mean, that's, again, it kind of connects to some of these old tales that we hear with the, with the kings and the emperors and the people living in the mountain, and of course the end times. And
it's interesting because I came across that story as well. However, the name that was used under the story was Lazarus Gitschner's.
Ah, okay.
Right. So there are, but everything else about the tale was pretty much the same, mysterious script and all. So what I found, that story happened somewhere around the 1500s, right? Like it was dated at like 1529 or something.
Yeah.
And so, kind of, keeping with a bit of a chronology, a little bit before that, in the 1220s, right? I came across this connection to ISIS, actually. So apparently, the Templars, one of the members of the Templar Order, had seen an apparition of Isis. And she told him to go to Untersberg Mountain and to, build some kind of stronghold there and await further messages from him. And, then like a year later, he, or a few years later, I guess, he gained a retreat or had another apparition. And, it's interesting that the Hitler's tea house appears to have been at least partially, like from a distance, the tea house, or what's been called Hitler's tea house, is has a very similar profile and outline as the ruins of this Templar stronghold, which is actually on Untersberg. Now, of course, the tea house isn't on Untersberg. But I thought it was interesting that there was this connection that leads back to the Templars, and of course the Templars are linked with the early I guess it's pronounced the Teutonic peoples, the early German peoples. So and it's not long after that Lazarus has his and again with that story, the Templars dig all these these catacombs and build all these monuments and stuff, and then a couple of hundred years later, Lazarus stumbles into this underground church network. So it's interesting going through the history. So, and a couple hundred years after that, we have I come across a report that comes out of apparently it was a local almanac about a gentleman named Michael Holzinger. So this guy's a hunter, and he's out hunting in the forest and around the base of Untersberg, and he's just gone. He's completely lost, and so. Several weeks later, of course, his brother is holding a church service for him, because they assume that, of course, he's long dead now. It's been a couple of weeks; he's been gone, and who stumbles into the church but Michael Holzinger. So. He just comes in and says he wants to give thanks for his his miraculous return, but refuses to talk about what happened to him. And when pressed, says that he doesn't know anything more than what Lazarus had said and what the stories, what all the myths and stories everybody already knows. So over the next little while, he becomes quiet and solemn. And very, not long after, becomes entirely mute. And eventually, there's this Archbishop, a Firmian, who hears about the story, and for obvious reasons, is intrigued. So he comes to the town, and I believe it's Salzburg, and tries to question Michael about what happened to him, and Michael still, even though this guy's an archbishop, still refuses to talk about what happened to him, except he said he would talk about it in confession. So the archbishop takes him in and does an actual confession with him. And as is reported anyway, promptly afterwards, the archbishop, throws down his robes and leaves the church for the rest of his life, and again refuses to talk about whatever Michael had told him. And then shortly afterwards, both Michael Holzinger and the former Archbishop Firmian die, albeit reportedly peacefully, whatever that means. That's as much as I could find on how they passed, was peacefully.
Yeah, that was one of the really interesting stories that I had come across as well. To think, well, there's a couple of points in that story that makes it really interesting. One is you can't help but wonder what it was that he told the bishop that was so, such a big deal that he'd leave his life's purpose so abruptly. It kind of reminds me of that Radiohead video, You Do It to Yourself, where this guy is lying on the street and, nobody knows why. And they go and ask him, and after he whispers it into their ear, then they're lying down. Then someone goes and asks them, and by the end of it, everybody in the city's lying down on the street. And it's like, well, what the hell did he say?
Well, you have to really ask yourself, what could somebody tell you
that would change your whole life's purpose?
That would literally shake the pillars of your
belief system.
Your belief system, your life. I mean, an archbishop, Now, we're not going to assume that every single archbishop is extremely faithful, but we're going to at least assume that they're pretty devoted to their profession.
Certainly.
And so what is it that an individual could tell you that would cause you to throw down your life's work, your life's profession, and
and the way they died was very. It was mysterious, right? I mean, you got both. To have two people die outside of a murder at the same time, or a car accident, or some kind of tragic event at the same time is weird anyway, right?
Yeah.
But, and then you have this emphasis on peacefully. They died peacefully. Well, explain that. What does that mean? Do it look comfortable?
And it really echoes back to the story with Lazarus. I mean, Lazarus was told, you do not speak about this unless you want to die.
Well, here's a thought that just came to me, right? What if, they were also given, a look inside the mountain, and they were given the choice to stay or leave, and they chose to stay. And just as Lazarus had said, he saw many people in there that he knew had died. Time stood still, right? And you're seeing all these people that are dead. Maybe that is the afterlife for them, right? And they were given a choice. You can stay here in the afterlife, or you can go back home. You can go back to life. And they were like, you know what? This place is great. Screw life. I'm staying here. And, of course, they're peaceful because they liked it, right? I mean, that's just a quick little... thing.
I guess that was one of the that was one of the things from Lazarus's tale, that there were people in there that he knew were dead, so they would have had to have been apparitions or spirits, and how were they in this mountain? So I guess the question is are we talking about a place actually inside the mountain, or is the mountain just riddled with portals, and it's taking these people to somewhere, not necessarily inside of a mountain?
Yeah, exactly. It could be a portal to the afterlife. And just jumping from, let's jump from the legends a little bit here. Although I wouldn't consider Michael's is more recent.
Yeah, that happened in 1738, and the reason why the story is so well recorded is that apparently it made it into a local almanac in the area. So Exactly. It was written down, it was recorded, it's part of history. I actually did a little poking around for this Archbishop Firmian, and the only hit I really got there was on a different individual with Firmian in his name, but the dates didn't really seem to line up. He would have been about 11 years old in 1738. So I'm not precluding that the individual I came across was maybe a relation to Archbishop Firmian, but it was also interesting that this later Firmian, who was also an archbishop, was very much into telescopes and astronomical equipment, and had a lot of mathematical gizmos and stuff like that. And in fact, there's a whole museum of devoted to basically the equipment that this archbishop had acquired, like he was very much into. And it really made me think of Hitler, because Hitler, of course...
Yeah, don't spoil that yet. Don't spoil it yet.
Well, needless to say, there are parallels to be drawn between an ancient archbishop and a not-so ancient ruler of a nation.
That's right. So what I'd like to do now is we've come from legends that are, kind of mangled up to a couple stories that get a little more recent, and they're more, you got Lazarus' story, which is recorded on tablets around the place. So I was like, okay, well, maybe there's some truth to this, maybe, that kind of thing. Then you get to the story of Michael Holzinger, who, again, this is, recorded, and it's much more recent. So, again, this is more accurate, is more reinforcing of the ideas that we're speaking of. So let's just jump right up to more recent times again, and of course, here's where we jump into on topic of missing people, because it's not just about the stuff that's in the mountain, but I mean people have disappeared. So like I'm going to start with probably the most famous story. In 1987, there was these 3 people that were said to have entered some kind of cave system in the mountain. And again, this is a big thing about the mountain, is it has this really extensive cave network under. In fact, Hitler supposedly used, is known for using some of these cave systems in the war. And like they didn't make all these cave systems. A lot of these were already made. So anyway, these 3 people enter this cave system in the mountain. And they vanish, right? So police and mountaineers, search for them, and the only thing they can find is their car, which is, of course, close by the mountain. However, 3 months later, family of the missing people actually get a call from these guys, right? They were apparently on a ship in the Red Sea near Alexandria in Egypt. And, they claimed that they had no clue how they ended up there, and they speculated that they must have entered some kind of portal that served as a time warp or something while exploring the cave system in the mountain. Now, one of the things that you'll come across when you, get to the story is that after the fact, after they had gotten home, they claimed that they hadn't even gotten to the mountain caves. Their plan was apparently to go by train to Salzburg and Villach in Austria. But they forgot their passports, and they accidentally crossed the border and jumped aboard a ship for fear of getting caught. Now, the thing itself about this excuse is that, people who have looked at it said that the excuse itself is actually rather suspicious because, that means that they would have had to have managed to travel 6 countries on foot with no passport, right? That's just for a lot of people.
Good luck getting into Egypt or Israel without a passport.
Yeah, so like that whole thing is almost
that's
like
the only way that you're going to end up in the Red Sea, right? You'd have to go through either Egypt or Israel, I do believe.
Yeah, so like either the whole thing is a lie, right? Or they were essentially they might have been telling the truth at first and then came back on it for some reason that nobody knows. Maybe because they thought people would think they're crazy. Right, but it really doesn't make sense to go with the passport idea. But jumping from there again, because one of the things I actually before we jump into the Hitler thing, I want to. This again is a little bit before that. This is sometime in the 1800s. There's all these tablets that were found, right, and people had translated to English because they were German. But have you heard of the Untersberg people?
The Untersberg people. Now, the only thing I've seen in reference to that were the dwarves.
Yeah, you're pretty much on there. Basically, there's all these plaques that were found and they were translated. And there was this one plaque that, they refer to these dwarves or little people specifically as Untersberg people, almost like their own race.
Oh, yes. Actually, I do believe I have some direct quotes from some of those tablets. It's like some of the Germanic texts that were found. And I mean, these are like 18th century plaques. The very said that they were very ancient and knowledgeable about magic, but sometimes they could be mischievous, but they were described as having, a big head, and of course they're dwarves, so they're little people, but they have a big head, quote, smart eyes and gray skin.
Yes, and
then some of the other, quotes, talk about, as people were trying to approach them, they'd suddenly disappear. That people in the area believe that the dwarves came from inside the earth, from some inner world or underworld, and they sometimes just straight up just described as having ashen gray skin and sometimes wrinkled. So a lot of these parallels with what we would today call modern grays. So once we start talking about missing time and time slips and teleportation and little people, and I mean the whole area of as part of a long-standing mythology is just rife with fairy lights and will-o'-the-wisps and I mean what we would in today's vernacular call UFOs or lights in the sky. Well, so there's all these parallels.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go with it. Is that they seem they have a lot of parallelisms to Alien, right? I mean, they were known to they were said to be magical and stuff like that. Well, if you were an older civilization and you've seen people using really advanced technology, you might think that's magic, right? Because there's no other way to really explain that. So the whole thing, like you said, you got missing time, you got portals, you got strange lights. The whole thing really does speak of, it sounds alien-y, right? I mean, for what we call aliens today, and they probably called it something different back then. To really drive home, I mean, you want to look at a modern-day example of taking this seriously, not looking back in the 1800s and stuff where people might have been a little more easy to trick into this kind of thought because it's just foreign to them, but looking at a more modern impact of this would be Hitler, because strangely enough apparently Adolf Hitler had an obsession with Untersberg, so much so that he built a house on top of a mountain named Berghof, which bordered Austria, and he built the house there specifically because he had an excellent view of Untersberg and he could stare at it all day. Hitler actually believed that the mountain and something inside of it, was one of his quotes, that there was something inside of it that had mysterious powers, and he wanted to tap into it to turn the tide of the war. And Hitler was so into this notion, and this is what I was trying to get you not to spoil, is that he got really into telescopes, but they weren't telescopes for astral viewing. They were made specifically for earth gazing so that he could further study the mountain. There's even a picture, like you can go on Google, and if you type in Hitler and Untersberg, you'll probably find this in the Google image search. There is a picture of Hitler standing next to a telescope pointed right at Untersberg. So interestingly enough, Hitler's own interest in the mountain came from, stories that, a lot of stories that we were telling, like in particular the emperor that was going to save the German race at Doomsday and stuff like that inside the mountain. Also, he was, moved by like the missing people, missing time encounters, and elves and aliens. So all these things kind of really pushed the idea to him that this is a magical mountain of some kind that could help him. But perhaps more interesting still is that Hitler believed Untersberg contained passageways that led to, and I quote, the inner earth, which of course is just another way to say hollow earth. Now, hollow earth is something that could be its own podcast in its own right. But one of the interesting things to kind of, again, reinforce this idea that, maybe there's a hollow earth inside this mountain was that there was actually an expedition as recent as 2008 where explorers entered a cave, one of these cave systems in the mountain, and their intent was finding on, how to explore it and see how far it went down, right? And they get down 1,056 meters, which is really far, before they, they decided that, they had to come back, they had to go home because they'd had no idea how far this was going to go, and they just weren't prepared to keep going down this shaft, I guess.
I believe at one point they actually had to use like a rubber dinghy to cross like an underwater lake or something.
Yeah, at 930 meters down, they actually had this lake in the middle of this, in this. I mean, that's big, right? I mean, you're talking about a lake inside a cave somewhere, and they had to cross it in a rubber boat. So I mean, this is like, it's almost stuff out of the movies, right? So who's to say how far that this thing goes down? And I mean, what does that say for the hollow earth theory? I mean, could this be one of the, maybe it's the only entrance, maybe it's one of many, if there is a hollow earth that can actually, you can actually get down there, right? I mean, I'm actually surprised that I haven't come across any more recent stories where they had tried to go farther, because what a find that would be. It would change like everything that we think of, the earth, really.
Well, and that's a pretty common theme that you'll find. Of course, I find caves very interesting. There's a lot of really interesting biology in ecosystems that happen in caves, and it really is a completely alien environment. There are some cave systems that are completely sealed off from the outside. And we only break into them accidentally in some cases, and we find whole ranges of life down there, entire ecosystems that are based off of microbial mats, or just different types of microorganisms, and it builds a whole food chain. So I mean, it's really not unthinkable that there could be complex organisms living in very extensive underground tunnel systems. I mean, let's face it, life has been on this planet according to the fossil record, and I mean, our fossil record goes back into microbiology now. I mean, we can find microscopic fossils, and what we found was that life appears to have started on this planet geologically in a blink of an eye after the planet cooled. So it's like as soon as the planet cooled, bam, there was life here. So maybe it developed underground first. Maybe maybe at some point life migrated underground to get away from a chaotic surface, and maybe some of the life stayed down there. So to me, it's not unthinkable that there would be a whole network. And you see it so many times. There's all these caves that are made off limits to the public, usually by some federal government decree. And there's other strange stories that talk about the military actually moving in and putting up metal doors on caves and just blocking everything off. And so when we get into these stories of cave systems in inner earth, it's not just in these little isolated areas. I mean, these are ubiquitous around the world. Everybody's talking about people that live underground. So what are we? Are these portals? Are they, entrances to a hidden underground world? It really is the epitome of mystery, because it's in the dark, unseen world that lies beneath our feet.
Well, I think one of the things that we at least have to touch on. I mean, because like with all these things, of course, you have to go in with somewhat skeptical. You have to think, you just not take everything at face value. So in that notion, there is an area around the mountain that is allegedly known for extremely strong magnetic anomalies, and this kind of thing has been said to cause hallucinations in humans. In fact, magnetic energies is what caused, if you remember, the Philadelphia experiment, which that was just retarded. So it's possible that many of these experiences may be, it could be chalked up to hallucinations. But on the other hand, in some of these cases, there are other witnesses and stuff like that. I'll give you an example here. Is that there was this French soldier who was stationed at the Untersberg, you know, and one of these nights, you know, he's at his guardhouse or whatever, and this one of these little people, I guess you could call them an Untersberg people, he comes up to the window and he knocks at it, and he's like, you know, the soldier gets up, you know, I guess confused anyway, and he looks out and there's like all of these like little people, and you know, he's pointing at the gate. He wants the soldier to open the gate so that they can go into the mountain. And the soldier, although spooked, you know, he doesn't do it. You know, the soldier, I guess he's told anyway that, you know, no one's allowed to go except in the case of blah, blah, blah. So he doesn't open the gate, but the little people go anyway. And I mean, they had like you know, someone playing a trumpet or something like that and a flute, and they like march in orders of two by two into this crack in the mountain, and they just disappear. So I mean, okay, so this is coming from the soldier. You could say, well, this guy's crazy, right? But the thing is that there was neighbors in the area that the next day actually said that they had heard all the commotion, right? I mean, so they heard the stuff going on, and they weren't at the you know, right next to the mountain. And I mean, the same could probably be said for the soldier. He's not exactly right next to this or in the mountain or whatever, because he's out at a guardhouse. So even though you can skeptically look at it and say, well, you know, hallucinations and all that, you know, possibly you know, there is truth to it no matter how you look at it, right? But,
well, and I guess there was a time slip story that I didn't really touch on. That it was an interesting one that was written down in around 1858, and it's a story of basically a wedding party. They're celebrating a wedding, and you know, there's all kinds of music and revelry going on. And you know, somebody tells a story about you know, a king and all of his soldiers who disappeared there, and apparently the groom starts calling out for these ghosts to appear, and you know, eventually you know, a dwarf comes out of the mountain and, you know, leads them, invites them into a festival into the mountain, and they all fall asleep, and then when they wake up, that, you know, they're led out of the mountain. But when they come out, you know, everything has changed, and you know, they go back to their village, which isn't far away, and you know, the village, it's their village, but everything is different, and you know, they're looking for their homes and they can't find them. There's other like newly built homes there, and eventually you know, the priest of the church tells them that, you know, like he pulls out a ledger, a book or something, and you know, says, look, here's a record that 100 years ago, you know, a married couple and their wedding party disappeared, you know, during the wedding, and you know, you must be that wedding party. So I mean,
oh, I remember this story.
You know, that's a story that's you know, written down in in a church ledger, and apparently there's a couple of different accounts in that area of similar stories that happened, quote unquote, you know, hundreds of years ago, and so you know, we get a at least, if not a scientific account or a hard account, at the very least we get a repeating pattern. You know, and like all things, like all myths and stories and legends, there has to be some root to the power, right?
Yeah.
Or to the power, there had to be some root to the story.
So one of the I guess one of the things that I had planned to do here, unless Ryan, that you have anything else to add on, you know, you got any more content there?
Well, I mean, when we, you know, of course, the Hitler story, and how it relates, you know, the connections between his interest in these, you know, telescopes and whatnot, and you know, that connection between this archbishop, you know, there's so many little tenuous connections here, But on its face, the mountain, just seems like a strange place. And as soon as you start digging into the stories and the mythology, it's one of those things where it's almost like it's almost like Skinwalker Ranch. Like there's so much going on there that it almost seems ridiculous. There's so many different types of stories.
It's true, but again, we have all these similar threads that, I mean, going right back to the legends, right up to modern times, tend to stay the same. Which, again, it really does kind of reinforce that, truth to the idea, that there's truth in all this stuff, right? So, again, these are some of the most interesting standout things that I've found while searching. I guess you too. And I think everybody else, because as I mentioned before, this was intended to be a live podcast. And so what we tried to do to, at least give something to you guys, was that you would be able to ask questions in our live chat page so that we can address them on the show. And I can see we have, Felianus. Is that how you'd say his name?
I guess.
So
felinus.
Okay, so felinus has been pretty active here throughout the duration of the podcast, despite not being able to hear it. So thank you, felinus, for that. And it looks like I've been looking over your questions because I do want to address. That's just the real point that we're trying to do with this, is to address all of these questions that our listeners may have into the show, rather than in comments after the fact. But it appears that yeah, basically you found all the same stories we did. So I think we got all of your answers here in this episode right now. But of course, I think I can speak for both Ryan and I that we really appreciate that you showed up to ask these questions, and hopefully the next time, we have a live podcast, it won't be marred with technical difficulties. Well, actually, we'll get it sorted out before announcing it next time. The next podcast actually is supposed to be next week, so unless our guest cancels, we should be doing it. But I can't say for certain if that one will be live, because, again, when we have a guest in a different area, it's going to throw another hurdle at us so far as regarding doing the live broadcast. So, at least for the time being, I think that we can summarize this right now as Untersberg having a common thread of strangeness throughout regarding missing time, underground networks of tunnels, disappearances, and
connections with strange little people.
Yeah, and of course the idea that there's this end times or people from the afterlife or something. So again, we have portals. We have a lot of just very strange things. And
interesting how it always comes back to the end of the world, isn't it?
Anyway, thank you all for listening. And again, if you have any paranormal stories, videos, whatever, head on over to effedupstories.com and go to submissions and submit it. We'll put it on the site. It could end up in a podcast. That's effedupstories.com. Become a member, because that's going to be a thing. It's going to be our hub place for all of our media. It's not just podcasts. It's many, many stories, pictures and stuff that don't make it into the podcast. And, of course, you guys will be able to help shape our podcast and all the different things that we do on the site. I'm really striving for a community thing here. So I will be adding features over time. We'll get to know each other. And, other than that, yes, if you have a blog or a website or something like that, we'd really appreciate it if you posted our link on there somewhere. Just a plain old link. because, again, it'll help our page rank. It'll get more people to our site, more stories. We can give you more. So that's the long and short of it. And, of course, this episode, as well as all of our other episodes, are available on the online store at effedupstories.com. You have to be a member to access it, but all the podcasts are dirt cheap, and it's done through PayPal, which is a safe and easy way to pay online. And the idea is that it'll help us pay for the website and continue to give you more content. So with that said, thank you all for joining us, and this is Will Pender signing out.
Thanks, everybody.